My name is Jody Peterson. I'm 29 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought I understood the direction of my life. I had a stable job in product design, a condo I'd worked years to afford, and a 3-year relationship with the man I believed I would eventually marry. His name is Daniel Morales. We moved in together about 18 months ago, and I genuinely believed we were building something real steady and quietly meaningful. I never imagined that the calmest, most forgettable Tuesday evening of my life would become the one that destroyed everything. We weren't fighting. We weren't distant. We weren't discussing anything heavy. It was just takeout from our favorite Thai place, both of us still in our work clothes, eating in comfortable silence. That kind of silence had always felt easy between us. Familiar. Safe. But that night, the quiet felt loaded. Daniel kept pushing his food around instead of eating. His shoulders were stiff eyes, distant jaw tight. I remember watching him and instantly knowing something was wrong, like the air itself had shifted without warning. "You're quiet tonight," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He didn't look up. "I need to talk about where we're going." My stomach tightened. The phrasing was vague, but the energy behind it wasn't. I set my fork down. "Okay, then let's talk." "No," he said sharply. "I'm done talking, Jody. I need action." I blinked. "What does that even mean?" He inhaled deeply, as if he'd rehearsed this in the mirror. "You have until the end of next month to marry me. Proposal ring, actual planning. If you don't commit by then, I'm done. I'll move out." For a second, I honestly thought it was a joke, a bad one. But his expression was firm, unblinking, expectant, like he'd just issued an order. He fully expected me to obey. "Yeah, Daniel, that's not a conversation," I finally said. "That's an ultimatum." "It's clarity," he corrected. "Either you're serious about me or you're not. 1 month. Decide." I stared at him. 3 years together, and suddenly I was being shoved into a countdown timer like a character in someone else's bad soap opera. "What if I need more than a month?" I asked quietly. "Then you're not the one," he said, "and we're wasting each other's time." My heart started pounding. Not because of fear, because of disbelief. I'd always been the calm one between us, the patient one, the steady one. I'd never expected this from him. "Daniel." I tried again. "Marriage is a partnership. You don't get to strong-arm me into a deadline." "I'm not strong-arming you," he snapped. "I'm telling you what I need. If you can't give it, then you're wasting my prime years." There it was, the entitlement, the pressure, the unspoken accusation. But behind his eyes, something else flickered: certainty. He knew I would panic. He knew I would fold. He knew I would chase him rather than lose him. He genuinely thought he had leverage. And in that moment, something in me snapped awake. "Thanks for the clarity," I said. His head jerked up. "What?" "You gave me 2 options. Married in a month or we're done." I rose from my chair, voice steady. "I choose done." The transformation on his face was almost cinematic. Confusion, then disbelief, then shock, then a flash of irritation, then panic. "You're joking," he said, voice cracking. "I'm really not. Ultimatums aren't love, Daniel." "That's not an ultimatum, I just told you what I need." "You literally said, 'Marry me in a month or I'm leaving.' That's the definition of an ultimatum." "You're twisting my words," he said desperately. "You're being dramatic." I shook my head. "I'm being honest. Something you should have tried before issuing threats." "Jody, wait." His voice softened, pleading. "Too late. I didn't mean it that way. I was frustrated. I wanted us to move forward. Please don't do this." "You did mean it that way," I said. "And you know what? It worked. Everything is crystal clear now." He stood abruptly, hands braced on the table like he needed support. "You're ending our relationship over this." Over one conversation. That wasn't a conversation. That was coercion. "This is insane," he snapped. "We've been together 3 years. You can't just throw that away." "You threw it away when you tried to force me into a marriage deadline." He stared at me for several seconds, chest rising and falling sharply, like he was genuinely waiting for me to take it all back, to crumble, to apologize, to beg. But I didn't, and that's when the anger surfaced. "You know what," he said, voice low and hot. "Fine, if that's what you want. I'll go pack." I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let him walk past me. The next hour felt like watching a stranger in my home. He stomped from room to room, yanking open drawers, shoving things into duffel bags with theatrical outrage. He muttered under his breath, slammed a door, came back out, slammed another. I didn't react, not once. Finally, when he returned to the living room with 2 bags and an armful of shirts draped over his shoulder, he stopped in front of me. "You're seriously letting me walk out?" he demanded. "You said you would if I didn't commit." I gestured toward the door. "I'm just helping you keep your word." His face went slack. "You're heartless." "No," I said softly. "I'm realistic." He stared at me for a long moment, as if he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Something inside me had shifted. The moment he pulled that stunt, something fundamental broke and wouldn't go back. He exhaled sharply through his nose and walked to the door. "You'll regret this." I'd regret letting someone manipulate me. He froze for half a second, then left without another word. The door clicked shut. And then, silence. Real silence. Heavy, strange, and strangely peaceful. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't chase after him. I just stood there in my own living room, staring at the spot where he'd been feeling an odd and unexpected sensation spreading through my chest. Relief. I didn't realize how tense I'd been for so long until that tension dissolved in an instant. My home felt bigger, my lungs felt clearer, my thoughts felt sharper. That night I slept better than I had in months. I had no idea what kind of storm was coming. No idea just how manipulative, messy, and gut-wrenching Daniel's next moves would be. No idea what secrets I was about to uncover. But that night, with my condo finally quiet again, I felt the first breath of freedom. The morning after Daniel walked out of the condo felt unreal in a strangely gentle way, as if the world had been washed clean overnight. I woke up before my alarm sunlight creeping across the room in a long, pale stripe, reminding me that everything had shifted. The other side of the bed, his side, looked exactly the same as it had every morning for the past year and a half, yet it felt profoundly different. I waited almost curiously for regret or sorrow to appear, but instead I experienced a quiet, steady sense of clarity that surprised even me. I made coffee, fed the small potted plant on the windowsill, and settled into my work, determined to treat the morning like any other until the first wave of vibrations rattled across the table. My phone lit up with a relentless stream of messages. Dozens of missed calls, a string of texts that stretched down the screen like a waterfall. The first set was apologetic, almost tender in tone. "Jody, please talk to me. I was upset. I miss you. Can we fix this? I love you." Then confusion seeped in. "Why aren't you answering? Are you awake? This isn't funny." Then anger. "You're seriously throwing away 3 years. You're being unreasonable. You're overreacting." And finally, predictable pressure. "Talk to me by tonight, or I'll assume you're done for good. You're going to regret this." The irony wasn't lost on me. After handing me an ultimatum, he now expected immediate communication, immediate clarity, immediate compliance. I muted the conversation and placed the phone face down. My morning was not going to revolve around someone who treated commitment like a bargaining chip. But I should have known Daniel would not be the only one to join the performance. Around 10 a.m., a number I didn't recognize called me repeatedly. On the fourth attempt, I answered, half expecting the exact voice I heard. "Jody, this is Margaret, Daniel's mother. We need to discuss what you've done to my son." It was barely morning, but she spoke with the dramatic gravity of someone delivering a legal verdict. I kept my tone neutral. "Good morning. What's going on?" "You know exactly what's going on," she said sharply. "Daniel showed up at our house devastated. He hasn't slept or eaten. He told me you blindsided him after everything he's given you." I blinked in disbelief. "Margaret, your son gave me a marriage ultimatum. I simply chose one of the options he presented." "He was trying to have an adult conversation about commitment," she retorted, her voice trembling with indignation. "You should have taken it seriously." "I did take it seriously," I replied. "That's why I refused to be manipulated. Adult conversations don't come with deadlines." "You're being selfish. You strung him along for 3 years, wasting his youth. A real partner would have known what he needed from you." There it was, an accusation wrapped in outdated expectations. "He could have talked to me," I said, letting my patience thin. Instead, he tried to force me into something on his timeline, not ours. "Don't you dare talk back to me like that," she snapped. "You owe him." I cut in gently. "I don't owe him coercion." She inhaled sharply, offended down to her bones. "You're making a huge mistake. We're done with this conversation." I ended the call before she could deliver another round of misplaced fury, then blocked her number with a sense of calm finality. By noon, Daniel's sister Hannah had entered the arena with a long message claiming, "I owed Daniel closure," followed by more disappointment-laced commentary. I sent one polite line explaining the ultimatum and left it at that. She didn't write back. That peace lasted only a few hours. Around mid-afternoon, my HOA president called me with the hesitant tone of someone who'd been pulled into something unpleasant. "Hi, Jody. I hope your day is all right. I just wanted to clarify a complaint we received this morning from someone named Daniel Morales. I closed my eyes. What did he say? She cleared her throat. He told us he was illegally removed from your unit and that he has tenant rights we failed to protect. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. He is not on my lease, not on my mortgage, and he has never paid rent. He stayed with me as a guest. That's what I suspected, she said. But we're required to follow up. I'll document what you said, and we won't pursue it further unless he brings actual legal documentation. Which he doesn't have, I replied. Understood. We'll close the matter. When I hung up, I stared at the wall in stunned annoyance. Daniel wasn't merely upset. He was escalating strategically, pulling every lever he could find to force a confrontation. I realized then that for him, the breakup wasn't an ending. It was a challenge he refused to lose. That evening, I decided it was time to start removing the last traces of him from my home. Not as a victory stroke, but because I needed the quiet clarity of my own space back. I began gathering the shirts he left in the closet, then the spare chargers he never remembered to pack, then the books he'd claimed he would read someday, but never did. I worked in silence until something small and heavy dropped from the top shelf and landed near my feet. A leather-bound notebook, brown, neat, expensive-looking. A familiar object I'd seen months ago but never examined. At first, I thought it might contain old work notes or sketches. Daniel always carried random notebooks for ideas, but when I picked it up and saw the embossed title, a thin chill ran down my spine. Our future plans. My pulse quickened. I opened the first page. Wedding venues. Possible dates. Budget ranges. Guest lists broken down by family, friends, co-workers. Notes about speeches he might give. Color palettes he liked for photos. And the dates in the margins? Some were from months ago. Some were from nearly a year back. It didn't feel comforting or romantic or sweet. It felt calculated. Because if he'd been planning this long, why choose an ultimatum instead of a conversation? I flipped deeper into the notebook and the answer emerged in black ink. A list titled, Reasons Jody Will Eventually Agree. Beneath it were lines that made my stomach twist. She hates conflict. She avoids disappointing people. She values stability. She's predictable under stress. Apply urgency to get commitment. Don't give her too much time to think. She doesn't want to restart dating at 29. Each line pricked my skin like needles. He hadn't just been planning the wedding, he'd been planning the pressure. Then the final page, a pros and cons list. Not about the wedding, about me. Pros supportive, financially stable, emotionally grounded, reliable, good partner, long-term. Cons slow decision maker. Doesn't respond strongly to emotional signals. Too independent. Might resist immediate marriage pressure. I closed the book with shaking hands. It wasn't a journal of a man in love. It was a manual on how to secure an outcome using psychological leverage. Everything he did the night before had been rehearsed, practiced, timed. This wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was a strategy he had been perfecting, and I had walked away before he could execute it. I placed the notebook in a box with the rest of his things and sat down slowly, letting the truth settle over me in a cold wave. The breakup wasn't the beginning of his manipulation. It was the moment I finally saw it. And the worst part, I hadn't even uncovered the darkest part yet. The day after I found Daniel's Our Future Plans journal sat heavy in my chest, as if the leather cover itself were made of concrete. Every word inside it replayed in slow motion, those tidy lines dissecting my personality. Those calculated strategies typed up as if I were a puzzle to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. The notebook wasn't just unsettling, it was clarifying. It made something click inside me like a lock disengaging. Daniel wasn't confused. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't acting out of a moment of frustration. He had scripted everything. And yet, unbelievably, this wasn't even the worst of it. The very next afternoon, while I was in the middle of reorganizing the living room, removing his leftover clutter, taking back my space, reclaiming corners of the condo that had slowly bent around his preferences, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another family member arriving late to the chaos. But something about the tone in the preview stopped me. Hey, Jody, you don't know me, but I think you deserve to know something. The name attached belonged to Elena, a woman I'd met once through mutual acquaintances at a birthday dinner months ago. She wasn't someone I expected to hear from, which made the message feel heavier. I opened it fully. I heard about the breakup from a coworker who knows Daniel, and I thought I should tell you. Daniel has been pretty close with his ex Lila at the gym for the last couple months. Coffee after workouts, private conversations, walks to the parking lot. My partner works out there too. It wasn't subtle. I didn't know if you were aware. The words blurred for a moment as the room seemed to tilt slightly. Not in shock, but in a dawning recognition of a pattern. Pieces that hadn't made sense now slotted together with eerie precision. The sudden ultimatums, the mood shifts, the rehearsed pressure, the journal planning months back, the urgency. The timeline. I typed back, "Are you sure he was seeing Lila, not just running into her?" "They dated years ago." Her reply came fast. He wasn't hiding it. People saw them together regularly. It looked intentional. "I'm really sorry." I sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa, letting the quiet surround me as I absorbed the message. My heartbeat was steady, not frantic, not devastated, just steady. I realized with a kind of sad acceptance that a part of me had been waiting for this revelation. There had been too much calculation in him lately, too much strategic thinking, too many decisions shaped like traps. People don't plan ultimatums unless they already have a fallback ready. Daniel didn't give me a deadline because he was terrified of losing me. He gave me a deadline because he was preparing to move on. I thought back to the last few months, his sudden increase in gym time, his secrecy with his phone, the random mornings he'd leave early, claiming, "I'll just grab a protein shake afterward," the shifts in attitude, the sudden interest in grooming more carefully before workouts. It had all seemed harmless. Annoying at times, but harmless. It wasn't harmless. It was a transition period. A bridge. I placed my phone down, inhaling deeply through my nose, letting the truth settle into the cracks his ultimatum had created. Instead of falling apart, a strange sense of relief pulsed through me. The ultimatum could have tied me to a man already half gone. Instead, it had severed the cord before he had the chance to break me in a deeper, quieter way. But the universe wasn't done revealing things. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my stomach tighten, not with dread, but with annoyance. Margaret. She had somehow gotten through, despite being blocked, probably calling from another number. I answered purely out of morbid curiosity. "Jody," she said, as cold as steel. "We need to discuss Daniel." "No, we don't," I replied calmly. "You walked out on him during a vulnerable moment." "He issued a marriage ultimatum," I said. "I chose not to accept it." She exhaled sharply. "He told me everything. He said you've been distant, that you stopped caring, and that he didn't feel secure with you anymore. He said he felt forced to say something drastic." So Daniel had already rewritten the narrative. "Did he mention he's been spending time with his ex-girlfriend at the gym?" I asked. Silence. Then a brittle tone. "What are you talking about?" "Multiple people have seen them together regularly. Coffee dates, private conversations, outings after workouts. It wasn't a coincidence." "That's ridiculous," but her voice wavered. "That's reality," I said. Daniel said. "He lied," I answered. "And you believed him." She inhaled sharply again and then hung up without another word. 2 hours later, Hannah, his sister, sent me a bitter message. "You're making things up to justify your behavior. Lila has a boyfriend." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because by then, the evidence was piling up. A mutual acquaintance from Daniel's old workplace reached out next. "Hey, hope this doesn't upset you, but everyone at his old job said Daniel and Lila got close again months ago. Lots of people assumed they were back together. He told some people you two were going through issues. Just wanted you to know." The truth wasn't just leaking out, it was tumbling in like a flood. I spent that night sitting at my kitchen table, the soft glow from the pendant lamp casting warm circles across the wood. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't spiral. I just sat with the information, letting each piece settle into place, creating a picture that made devastating sense. Daniel hadn't been acting out of fear that I wouldn't commit. He'd been acting out of fear that Lila wouldn't wait. If I proposed, he'd secure the stability he used to value. If I refused, he'd pivot seamlessly towards someone familiar, a backup he'd been nurturing. Either way, he wouldn't end up alone. Until I did something he didn't expect, I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I didn't crumble. I didn't argue. I simply accepted. And his entire strategy fell apart. The next morning, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into view, not through rumor, not through messages, but through something that plastered itself across social media with a flourish of emotional theatrics. A photo of Daniel and Lila appeared on her Instagram story. 2 coffee cups, 2 hands brushing, a gym mirror in the background. Her smiling, leaning into him just slightly. The caption, "Right place, right time." Not overtly romantic, not explicit, but intimate in a way that didn't require explanation. I stared at the image for a long moment, feeling nothing dramatic, No collapse, no heartbreak, no explosive anger. Just confirmation. Confirmation that I had walked away from a man who thought he was the puppeteer of everyone's emotions. Confirmation that I had been seconds away from marrying someone who considered me a predictable chess piece. Confirmation that leaving wasn't a loss. It was luck. I locked my phone, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled deeply, feeling a strange sense of peace spreading through me, an unfamiliar but welcome warmth. Daniel wasn't the one who got away. He was the one I was saved from. And I had no idea yet that the drama was about to escalate into something far more chaotic, louder, and messier than anything I'd faced so far, because Daniel wasn't done trying to rewrite the story, and neither was his family. I thought Daniel's quiet reappearance on Lila's Instagram story would be the final, anticlimactic confirmation that I'd made the right decision. A soft ending, a quiet closure, something that would fade into the background as I healed, worked, and continued recovering the parts of myself that had gone dormant in that relationship. But the universe had no interest in giving me a soft ending. It wanted spectacle. 3 days after the photo surfaced, I received a message from one of the only people in Daniel's extended family I genuinely liked, his cousin Arya, the one who always treated me with kindness and who never engaged in his mother's melodramatic theatrics. "Heads up," she wrote. "There's a family dinner this weekend and you are coming up a lot. They're painting you as the villain. Just thought you should know." I called her immediately. Arya sighed. The moment she heard my voice. "It's bad, Jody. Not your problem, bad, but bad. His mom is telling everyone you abandoned Daniel, and he's encouraging the story. They're acting like you left him with no warning, like you blindsided him emotionally. They're rewriting everything." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course they are. But that's not even the part that caused the explosion, Arya continued. That came after Lila made her little right place, right time post. Daniel basically confirmed they're together now. I felt more tired than hurt. 3 weeks after we broke up. "Trust me," she said. Everyone noticed. And then someone else jumped into the conversation. My breath caught. "Who?" "Lila's ex-boyfriend." The silence on the line felt charged. "What did he say?" "It was brutal," Arya said plainly. He commented under their picture something like, "Interesting. That's the same workout buddy you told me was nothing 2 months ago." It was up for almost an hour before it got deleted, but half the family saw it, and some of her friends blasted it across their stories. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt this quiet, somber disappointment that settled deep within me. Because this wasn't just drama. It wasn't just petty behavior. It was confirmation of something I'd already understood. Daniel had rehearsed the breakup, strategized the ultimatum, and positioned himself so that no matter what I did, he'd have someone waiting. And he still managed to blow it up publicly. What happened after that, I asked carefully. Arya inhaled. His parents turned on each other. His mother blamed Lila's ex, then blamed you, then blamed social media. His father, though, she paused. He told her flat out that Daniel created the mess. That surprised me more than anything. Daniel's father, Robert Morales, was a quiet man, but he rarely contradicted his wife. That house ran on Margaret's emotional temperature, not on logic. What exactly did he say, I asked. He said, and I quote, "You gave the man an ultimatum and he called your bluff. What did you think would happen?" And then Daniel's mother lost it. She said you manipulated Daniel, that you exploited his insecurities, that you pressured him. Pressured him, I almost laughed. I refused an ultimatum he volunteered. I know Arya said sympathy, softening her tone, but his mom doesn't do reality. She does narratives. That much I already understood. Arya continued. His father actually stormed out of the dinner, which never happens. Apparently he and Margaret have been fighting about you for days. She's acting like you're the villain who ripped the family apart. I sat down slowly on the couch, absorbing all of this. I knew Daniel's mother had a flair for dramatics, but hearing it from an internal witness made it feel even more surreal. And Daniel, I asked. Oh, he sat there with this helpless little expression, like he was the victim of the universe. He told everyone he tried everything and gave you multiple chances. You should have seen it. He practically nominated himself for sainthood. That was Daniel in a nutshell. Rewrite history until it paints him in the softest lit possible. I thanked Arya for the warning, and after we hung up, I took a long, slow breath. His family was unraveling. His mother was rewriting timelines. His father was finally seeing through the fog. And Daniel was doing everything he could to spin a narrative where he was the noble one abandoned unfairly. But even knowing all of this, even learning how tangled and messy everything had become behind the scenes, Nothing prepared me for what came next. Because the following afternoon, a text came through from an unsaved number. Daniel again, but using a different phone. So I see you're keeping tabs on my life. Pathetic. I've moved on. You should too. No greeting, no transition, just hostility. I stared at the message for a moment, stunned by the brazenness before typing a single response. I'm not keeping tabs. People tell me things because your behavior affects mutual friends. I wish you and Lila well. Goodbye, Daniel. Then I blocked the number. That should have been the end of it. But Daniel, like his mother, didn't believe in endings, only in unfinished battles. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox to find a white envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized too well. Inside were 3 full pages covered in emotionally charged prose, each paragraph soaked in self-pity and twisted logic. He wrote that I abandoned him in his time of need, that I should have understood he was testing whether I truly cared, that I failed him as a partner, that I gave up too easily, and that I would regret losing someone who loved so deeply. But the final paragraph caused the air to leave my lungs. I know you'll come back once you realize what you lost, but I won't wait forever. You have 1 month to prove you're serious. Your choice. I sat very still after reading that, the pages trembling slightly between my fingers. Another ultimatum, another timed demand, another attempt to twist my decisions into actionable leverage for himself. It was almost absurd, almost funny, almost sad, and yet deeply clarifying. I placed the letter down, took a picture of it for documentation, and sent it to my friend Nathan, the paralegal who had helped me box Daniel's belongings. His reply came instantly. Frame that. Exhibit A of why you made the right decision. I didn't respond immediately. I leaned back into the couch, letting the surreal absurdity of the situation wash over me. The ultimatums, the journal, the secret gym meetings with Lila, the social media fallout, the family collapse. Every single piece formed a mosaic of a person I was lucky to be free from. But the universe still wasn't done. Because the next day, while picking up paint samples from the hardware store, a small project to reclaim my space, I found myself face to face with someone I truly hadn't expected to see. Daniel's father. He recognized me before I even had time to look away. Jody, he said, gently walking over, can we talk? I nodded cautiously. I want you to know I don't blame you, he said quietly. You did the right thing. And honestly, I'm sorry for some of the things my wife and son put you through. I let out a slow, measured breath. You don't have to apologize. It isn't your responsibility. No, he said, shaking his head, but I wish things had been different. I tried to teach Daniel accountability. His mother didn't. He grew up believing every disappointment was someone else's fault. He paused. This won't end well for him, but that's his doing, not yours. His sincerity settled into me, warm and grounding. Thank you, I said softly. That means a lot. He gave a small nod, then stepped back. Take care of yourself, Jody. You deserve better than what he offered. And then he walked away. That moment felt like closure. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that comes with apologies or reconciliation, but the kind that comes from someone who sees the truth clearly and says it out loud without an agenda. As I drove home with the paint samples sitting in the passenger seat, I realized something profound. Daniel's world was collapsing not because I left, but because his manipulation no longer worked on the people who mattered most. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something pure and unshakable. Peace. In the quiet days after running into Daniel's father, something inside me finally settled. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a grounded, steady calm, the kind that comes only after your life has been shaken apart, examined piece by piece, and then reassembled with clearer eyes. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd dimmed over the course of the relationship until I started living without its shadow. The space he used to occupy now felt breathable again. I spent the weekend making deliberate choices, small ones, but meaningful ones. I moved the couch back to the spot I'd always preferred before he insisted it made more sense angled toward the window. I rehung the art he used to say was too abstract. I repainted the hallway a soft sage green, a color he once dismissed as a mood killer. I reorganized my closet so it finally made sense to me again, not arranged according to the system he swore was more efficient. Each change felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself. And then came the phone number change. I sat at the kitchen counter, my thumb hovering over the confirm button longer than I expected. Changing the number felt strangely symbolic, like closing a door, sealing it shut, turning the key, and dropping it down a storm drain. But when I finally pressed confirm, the relief that swept through me was immediate and solid. The silence that followed was not lonely, it was restorative. I gave the new number only to my family and a tight circle of friends. The world outside that circle didn't need access to me anymore. Not Daniel, not his mother, not his sister, not anyone who believed the version of events he curated to protect his ego. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt unreachable to the wrong people, and that sense of protection was intoxicating. That same week, I returned to hobbies I hadn't touched in ages. I pulled my sketch pads out of the storage bench, the ones filled with half-completed designs and abandoned ideas. I realized I'd stopped drawing regularly around the same time Daniel started critiquing everything I made subtly at first, then more openly. Too abstract, too emotional, too unrealistic. I didn't realize how deeply his words had seeped into me until I picked up my pencil again and felt my fingers go stiff. It took effort to push past the hesitation, but the moment the graphite touched paper, something unlocked. I drew for hours, messy sketches, unplanned lines, imperfect shapes. It felt like shaking dust off parts of my mind I'd forgotten. When I finally leaned back, my hand ached, but my chest felt lighter than it had in ages. I met friends for dinner again. Friends I'd drifted away from, not because I wanted to, but because Daniel always found an issue with the places they chose, or the times they suggested, or the jokes they made. Little critiques that chipped away at my social life until I barely recognized my own patterns anymore. Seeing them again felt like returning to a familiar room I thought had been locked forever. They welcomed me back without bitterness, without questions, without judgment. They simply handed me a glass of wine and asked how I'd been. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. They could read the relief in my posture before I said a word. But the biggest shift came unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon when I was sanding down an old bookshelf I planned to refinish. Daniel had always hated when I worked on furniture projects. He said the noise gave him headaches, the dust made him anxious, and the tools were too much clutter for a small condo. Eventually, I stopped entirely because it was easier than listening to another lecture about how my hobby was inconvenient. Standing there with sandpaper in my hand, I felt an ache in my chest. Not grief, but something closer to rediscovery. I remembered how much I used to love refurbishing old pieces. The meditative rhythm of sanding, the quiet focus of applying stain, the gentle satisfaction of bringing new life to something worn. I worked for 2 hours straight until the piece was smooth under my palms. When I stepped back, covered in a fine layer of sawdust, I laughed softly to myself. The kind of laugh that comes from realizing you've regrown a part of your soul you barely noticed had gone missing. In those small, steady ways, my life began to feel like mine again. And yet, even as I rebuilt myself, Daniel's chaos lingered at the edges, not through direct contact, but through the ripples spreading through mutual connections. Aria texted updates from time to time, usually amused, sometimes bewildered, never dramatic. Apparently, Lila had pulled back after her ex public comment. Their relationship, which Daniel had expected to blossom effortlessly, instead crashed under the weight of its own timeline. Aria said Lila looked embarrassed around people who knew both her and Daniel. She kept her distance. Daniel, in turn, had begun spinning a fresh narrative about how Lila misled him, how she used him for attention, how she didn't understand his emotional needs. His mother believed every word. His father reportedly rolled his eyes so hard during one heated exchange that Aria swore she heard his vertebrae crack. None of it surprised me. Men like Daniel didn't love people. They loved reflections. And when reflections shifted, they panicked. By the end of the month, the last tenuous threads tying me to him had finally disintegrated. Not because of any dramatic confrontation or apology or confession, but because of the quiet fact that Daniel simply moved on to another story, another version of himself, another place to direct his need for validation. He had always needed an audience more than a partner. One evening, while leaving the grocery store, I unexpectedly saw Robert again. He was heading in the opposite direction, a small bag of tools in his hand. When he noticed me, he offered a nod, not awkward, not forced, but almost respectful. "Jody," he said with a faint, warm smile, "you look well." I told him honestly. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded again. "Good. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." And then he added something that felt like a quiet benediction. "You walked away from the storm. Don't ever doubt that it was the right choice." There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness toward his son, just truth from a man who had watched Daniel grow up and understood him better than anyone else ever could. After we parted ways, I stood beside my car for a long moment, the early evening breeze brushing against my skin, and realized I wasn't carrying anything heavy anymore. Not the guilt his family tried to place on me, not the confusion he created, not the fear of starting over, not the echo of his voice telling me he needed an answer on his terms. My life was quiet. My condo was mine. My time was mine. My choices were mine. Daniel wanted a dramatic breakup story, one where I collapsed, regretted, fought, begged. Instead, he ended up with the one consequence he didn't know how to handle: silence. And I ended up with something he couldn't offer me in the 3 years we were together: peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters the moment someone raises their voice. Not the conditional kind that lasts only as long as someone else approves. Not the performative kind meant to impress outsiders. Real peace. The kind that grows roots. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else. The kind that makes you stronger, softer, and braver at the same time. Sometimes the best revenge isn't vindication or exposure or proving a point. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being genuinely okay. Not pretending to be okay, not posting it, not announcing it, not forcing it, just living it. And that's what I was finally doing. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's project mirror